string of gatherings, for lack of a better way of sort of calling what we've been doing here. And each time I feel like we've had really vibrant conversations. And today I'm excited to present to each of you more of a panel type roundtable. So we have a few people who will be presenting to us some of the things that they've learned in the processes of adapting to an upside down world. And also just sharing their tips and tricks and those types of things. So I think today, Jess, maybe since we have so many people joining us in a little bit of a different format, do we have the ability for people to raise their hands on this?
Why don't, if you have a question or a comment, chat me. I think
You can raise your
yeah,
you
if you
can
go
raise
to
hand.
at the bottom bar,
yeah.
You see that the third icon over says participants. If you click onto that, about halfway down on the right-hand side, far right-hand side, you can see there's a raise hand button. That's also a possibility.
Great.
So it doesn't
It's
hide
also
chat.
on my screen. It's actually all the way down to the bottom of the list of participants.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, we all have.
So there it is. I just did it, and now I'm
different
lowering.
systems. Yeah. So in some way, flag us down if you have a question while people are presenting, since we have so many. And I think we'll just jump right into it. So today, our panel of experts include Dr. Jennifer Higgins, owner of Commonwealth GrantWorks. We have Maria Held, who's the Senior Director of Class Engagement and Philanthropic Support at Smith College. John Bidwell, the Executive Director of the United Way of Hampshire County. Holly Martineau, Director of Development from Snow Farm. And Jillian Morgan, Corporate Relations Officer for the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. So welcome, everybody. I will just allow each of you maybe to take your turns, and if somebody wants to go first, I'll just open up the floor. How does that sound?
I'll go.
Great, welcome.
Thank you very much. This is a wonderful opportunity to share some tips and tricks that hopefully will help other people. Throughout this process, my feeling, I take a little bit of an analogous scenario with the toilet paper situation. I'm feeling like there's so much out there in terms of support for small businesses if they know where to look, that and it's COVID emergency funds, that I'm actually suggesting something a little counterintuitive, and that is to practice a little bit of restraint so that there's enough to go around for everybody. And that's not only for that reason. I think it's also important to not really become complacent or dependent on short-term fixes. So the second tip I would offer up is that folks really need to continue seeking medium to longer term funding opportunities, identifying funders who are really very brave and ready to embrace the longer term picture at this point. And I know there are fewer of them, but they do exist. So finding them and hitching your wagon to them is also a really good tip, I think. And for the third tip, I would say that many people are sort of regarding this as sort of a vacation or a holiday period of time. We're home or we're doing things that we may not ordinarily have time to do. So my suggestion is to not look at this as a period of downtime, but to use it to replenish and restore what works best with your agency. And then have a longer term view, maybe do some vision work and some strategic planning while you have this sort of downtime. So those are my 3 tips.
Oh,
You're welcome.
great.
Questions? Oh.
This is Ruth Griggs of the Northampton Jazz Festival. Are we going to be talking about the role of Giving Tuesday at all in today's call, do you think?
We don't, that I'm thinking of, have any experts on the panel who have indicated any knowledge about that. I'm not sure if any of the attendees have insight and might be able to?
I'm raising my hand physically, actually.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like Holly's able to speak to that. Do you want to just go right ahead and take the floor?
I will. What I'd like to do first, that was just talk about the three things that I've sort of been focusing on. Just as a, precursor here is just to note, I've spent all of my adult life as a fundraiser, and I love development and I love asking for money. So for me, this time has been difficult, not so much professionally, it's me as a person who sees that as such a part of who I am in my, not only in my job, but in my volunteer work, et cetera. So it's been hard for me to not do things the way that I always do. So I've been looking at a few different things, and one of the things that I've looked at, and I've taken this term from one of my colleagues, is taking the long view to look at what's happening today, but really looking forward, and not just looking to the future, but really taking the long view. Looking at a view, it's a vista, and I sort of see this as how I can do my job in a world that will not look the same. And we've been doing that at Snow Farm. How are we all? We exist because we have people coming and taking classes. So our long view is very different. And then I lump into consistency and communication. Those are the other two things that I've been focusing on. And I speak directly from a development perspective on consistency. As a fundraiser, I stay in touch with donors in a variety of different ways, but in this day and age, and I should say maybe 2 months ago, I was doing a lot more with texting and emailing and that sort of thing. And now I'm sort of going back to what I used to do, which was being on the phone all the time. And I'm calling 30, 40 people a day on some days, and I might speak to 5 or 6, but I'm trying to be consistent with people. That's been my key, is to maintain those relationships. I'm not asking for money. I'm also not turning it down. If someone says, I'd love to send my gift, and I welcome that, and I'm thrilled to get the gift, but at this point, I'm just trying to be consistent, and consistent is a notch above what I was doing before. It's not the same. It feels really different to me. I'm comfortable on the phone, but I've also adapted to the world of social media and, again, texting and emailing, things like that. So I'm sort of going back to what I might have done more of 20 years ago. To speak about Giving Tuesday, personally and professionally, I made the decision with our executive director that we were not going to be active on Giving Tuesday. We will certainly accept all gifts, but especially in the state of Massachusetts, what we are seeing at a state level is pretty scary stuff. And we are seeing so many organizations that are asking for funds, whether it's for our frontline people, people who are not lucky enough to be able to work from home, et cetera. So we're really cautious about that. So we've made a conscious decision to not pursue gifts on Giving Tuesday, because there are other organizations that are helping people in a different way, and we feel it's important that they seek the funding on that particular day.
I have a question related to that. Will you be highlighting those particular organizations instead? Or just assuming that people will direct their giving as opposed to directing it to you?
Yeah, a little bit of both. One of the ways that we've been communicating in a broader way with our community, and our community is international, it's not just in the Pioneer Valley, but we've been communicating with people with various things, and one of them has been the efforts to feed our frontline people. And one of our staff people was the creator of this food program that's happening at Cooley Dickinson right now, Lisa Oram. And so we've been highlighting those types of things in those organizations around us. We happen to be in the hill towns, and the situation in the hill towns is different than it is in downtown Northampton and different than it is in Springfield. So we've been taking things one step at a time. But I like the idea of focusing more on what's happening around us. And I will certainly pass that on to our communications director. But we are just in our way communicating about supporting the various communities.
This is John Bidwell. I can talk a little bit about Giving Tuesday as well. So
Great.
we've been looking at these in the last year and we've steered away from them. One of the reasons being that with all of our outreach, we try to find communications and try to contact people when they're not already being contacted. So that's not to say that an organization shouldn't do it. I think there can be very good reasons to do it. But as we looked at our calendar of how our outreach was going to occur over the course of a year, we just felt like the Giving Tuesday was something that was going to be tacked on. It didn't necessarily have a strategic fit with what we were doing, and we wanted to make sure that everything we were doing was more strategic.
I can add something to Giving Tuesday as well. So first off, I'm Jillian Morgan. I'm the Corporate Relations Officer at the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. My role in particular focuses on corporate stewardship as well as just community engagement. So I oversee and support our volunteer coordinator as well as our events coordinator. So I'm in kind of an interesting place over these past few weeks and then looking ahead over the next 6 months in terms of what we're going to do for events. But just to piggyback on what John said about Giving Tuesday, we are planning on doing some Giving Tuesday posts. We're not going to be quite as aggressive as maybe we would be in previous Giving Tuesdays, just as we think, we do understand that this crisis has impacted people so differently, and I think it's really important to be sensitive in how we approach people for giving. But we're kind of using Giving Tuesday as an opportunity to do some different types of engagement. So I've seen some really great suggestions about doing a day of gratitude on Giving Tuesday, maybe highlighting folks that have already given over the last few weeks since the COVID-19 crisis. We're going to actually be doing a Facebook Live event on Giving Tuesday this year, just to give folks in the community the opportunity to ask us questions about what we're doing in response for COVID-19. And maybe if they do want to know how they can help, we can also spotlight our donation page and tell people how they can give. But we really want to try and focus more of that Q&A on the resources that the community might need, who if they're food insecure, where can they go? And also people in the community who maybe don't know very much about the food bank and are seeing, food bank spotlight in the news, seeing what their local food bank is doing in the community and using it that way.
I'm wondering, each of you have been able to touch a little bit now on Giving Tuesday, but not everyone's had an opportunity to share what their sort of tips and thoughts are during this process, unless you feel like you just wove them in.
I can jump in if you want. I'm Maria Held. I am at Smith College, so I've been there in the development team for almost 20 years, and so higher ed is the sector of my expertise, if you will, and within that, raising support from individual donors specifically. And really, we're focusing right now on one-to-one outreach to as many prospects as we can. We paused our direct marketing to the masses, understanding that the lower level contributors are more likely, more severely or immediately impacted, and the higher level prospects may still have the capacity to help us in the short term. We don't want to assume anything. We're trying to have as many conversations as we can. We know that a lot of people want to help and want to hear from us, and we've had a lot of gratitude expressed to us when we have reached out to people saying, oh, I do want to hear about what's going on at the college. I want to, hear how I can help. And so we have had people still continuing to give, and so I think not assuming that outreach would be bad at that time would be my first tip. Also, just talking about how we communicate and frequencies. So we did do some pausing of our sort of mass communications, but we're mostly pivoting to electronic, but we aren't completely closing the door on doing paper solicitations of our constituents, because we have many donors who prefer to give via the mail, and it's a revenue stream that's really important to the college. We raise a lot of money from the paper mail, and so making sure that you keep in mind, your strategy for the current fiscal year and then longer term is important. And if you need to get an envelope in someone's hand, making sure that you're building in extra time, because a lot of the mail houses that we work with have fewer staff for, physical distancing purposes, and we need to build that out into the timeline if you are going to be working with a vendor to help you with mail. So a little bit of what's going on our end, just reaching out as much as we can. There's an article today in Mass Live about some of the, the financial issues going on at the college. So, and I can say that from my perspective, it's accurate. So if you have any questions about that, of course, that's a resource as well. Happy to answer any questions on sort of my category.
I'm just going to open up the floor here and see if anybody has any questions so far. And just remember that you're on mute and I can't quite see everybody on the screen. So if you're having a hard time unmuting yourself, you could type it in the chat for me. And I think maybe while we're waiting to see if anybody has any thoughts or additions, the thing that I've also been noticing has been, it is not often, but I think effective when organizations are focusing on storytelling of their mission and highlighting that as a way of communication. I can say for myself, it really pulls me in terms of thinking about giving to an organization that's trying to continue with the work that they're doing. And it feels effective to me without necessarily asking. So you're keeping your organization top of mind in terms of the way in which you're meeting the crisis, and also not feeling badly about asking for money.
Go one step further, Kristen, and I think it's really great that you raised that point. And I think in terms of describing the experience that organizations are going through, I think it's really helpful to show what actions are being taken to cope, such as the Zoom contact they're having with their clients, or the regularity of meeting and touching their clients at various points throughout the week or month or whatever. I think all of that detail is actually very helpful too, because it's showing a flexibility on the part of the organization, mindfulness about what is working for others that are affected by COVID. I just feel like even a little bit more detail would be really great about what you're doing to be proactive.
I think that is a great point as well, talking about telling stories. I've heard some people say, and I think it's really wise to think of it this way, that some of the stories that we're telling now, maybe someone who we're telling them to isn't in a position to give right now, but it might just help with building that relationship and helping them learn more about your need in the community. So that way down the line, if they are in a position to give, they've just got more stories behind your need and your impact in the community. So I think that's really great. And another thing too with telling stories as well, and this kind of weaves into another tip that I had, was providing relevant information to anyone that you're talking to, both the community that you serve as well as donors. So one piece of that storytelling, I think that's really important, and something that I'm running into in the event space, is just being really honest about what you're up against. If you're in the position that you're canceling an event, it's okay to tell people what that funding gap potentially you're looking at from that event that you maybe had to cancel, or maybe that you've pivoted and you've made it a virtual campaign, as we're looking to do with one of our spring events right now, talking about what the spring event usually makes, and helping people kind of picture what you're up against for funding gaps. Another thing that we're doing as well at the food bank is we're telling people what things cost. So we're telling donors, a meal truck costs $32,000, and that donor maybe isn't going to do the full $32,000, but it might help them to think, oh, I could give this much and they'll be contributing to that, that many meals, or to contributing to that meal truck that's really needed right now.
I do think that's a really helpful and important point, is that the continued education that every organization can share within their community also just gives a gauge of not only like what kind of need that you maybe, what type of support you may be needing, but also the things that are relevant in your budget and the ways in which anyone who's participatory in whatever way they are, not necessarily maybe as a donor, even in some ways as a participant, to have that transparency around costs and being effective in actually trying to meet your mission.
Yeah, and as someone said earlier, I would say, really focusing on balancing the short-term, needs, the fires, with the long-term mission and strategy that you may have for your organization. Because, at Smith, I mean, we see, returning the half a semester of room and board put us back $8 to $10 million. The college is projecting, and so we're sharing that information, but we're also sharing how we need to balance the Smith of today with the Smith, of the future, and how to, fill the immediate term needs while also not cannibalizing the educational experience for future students by just moving funds forward. The most common thing we hear is, you have a large endowment, why don't you just take money from that? Pay for all of this, and it's not practical. I mean, as many of us know, of course, most of the endowed funds that institutions have specific restrictions tied to them. You can't just take out money like it's a checking account and spend it on your immediate needs. And so really educating our population about what the true financial impacts are and what that means for the community, staff, the faculty, the students. We had to send them computers in the mail and Wi-Fi hotspots and things like this. I mean, there's a lot of unanticipated expenses that come into play. And unless you're educating your community about those costs, especially at an institution, of course, like Smith, people will assume that institution is rich, you don't need my support, I'm going to support this other group instead. And I would say, you should support that other group and Smith, and here's why. And make the case for why supporting your mission is important, while also encouraging the support of other institutions. Because, I mean, you should be supporting the food bank and, the education of students for the future, because these are the students who will hopefully create policy in the future that will help make our world better. It's teaching someone to fish and also feeding the community for the future. So there's importance in both sides.
I'm going to jump in on something Maria was saying about mission, that the mission is how we met our mission, how we met our mission, I'll just say it that way, 3 months ago is going to be different than how we meet our mission 6 months from now. And our mission may not change, but how we meet it will. And so I think that that's a huge part of the communication now. One of the things that we've been doing, and I'm speaking specifically about Snow Farm, we are an organization that has 50 plus acres in Williamsburg. We have 11 buildings on our property. And so we have 2 full-time staff people who are working. And one of the things that we've been doing in communicating with our community of donors and students who've taken classes for many, many years is what is happening now. The majority of us are not in the office working. We are all working from home. We all are working reduced hours. We all made that decision as a group that what could we do to help ensure the future success of our organization? What could we do today for tomorrow? So working and letting our community know that these things are happening, but that there are things happening on campus. For instance, we received a grant last year to renovate our ceramic studio. Those renovations are done. So we've been celebrating that and photographing and sending out pictures on a regular basis and reaching out to people and getting comment from our ceramics instructors. Are you excited that, in October of 2020, you get to teach a class? You're not teaching the class you were scheduled to teach in June, but we're really excited about October. So we're trying to continue that whole taking the long view piece of that Snow Farm will continue on. And we are excited to be doing that. Things are growing and our fruit trees have flowers and the ceramic studio is done. These are things that are happening on a regular basis. And I think these are the things that are prompting people to send in the checks, because we are sending thank you letters on a regular basis. but we've sort of doing behind the scenes, the things that people don't typically see. Those are the things we can talk about because they are still happening.
This is John Bidwell. I'm glad to chime in with what we've been doing at United Way. When this COVID-19 crisis first came along, there were a lot of people who were like, we shouldn't be communicating as much. People are getting overwhelmed with communications. The communications that are going out are repetitive. They're very lengthy. And we did some research and really found out during crisis communications that that's actually a time when you should step up how much communications you do. So we've actually stepped up our communications by approximately 400%. And our KPIs, meaning our key performance indicators, those things that show as to, has this effort paid off, have been pretty strong. So the visits to our website are up over 400%. Our social media is up, interactive, whether you're measuring that by likes or comments, is up by 20%, although the comments are by 200%. So those KPIs have been very strong, which lead us to believe that the outreach has been worth it. We've also heard anecdotally that people have appreciated with what we've put out. Now, the caveat to all this is that if you're going to be doing more outreach, that you're giving content that's worth it. So just repeating what other places are doing, which is what you see in a lot of communications, is not the way to go. You're going to have to figure out something that's unique to you. And in our case, one of the big strengths is we've put together a database of volunteers and donations that link people who want to help with those who need help. So that's been an advantage to us. That's something we got on early, and it's paid off. In terms of how we do outreach, it really depends on the audience. If it's a leader of an organization, then I'm going to do a personal outreach. And a lot of times I'm writing more letters, so I'm trying to get better at my penmanship, or I'm doing personal phone calls. At the same time, though, we are going to be increasing our electronic outreach. This was something that we had planned to do before COVID-19. And now with COVID-19, we're just speeding up that process even more. So we're meeting with vendors right now to figure out how to do more online solicitation and widening the funnel, because that's really important. It's not just getting the leaders, but it's engaging a broader audience. And so again, you got to figure out what your messaging is. Once you figure out what your messaging is, feel free to step up the communications, but keep them short. Tailor your communications to your audience. The other thing that I would say is very important is find out what your niche is in the COVID-19 situation. Now, for us, it's pretty straightforward. We deal with people who are in poverty or near poverty. Unfortunately, that tailors well to the situation we're in. However, I've also seen organizations that don't necessarily have to step up, that are stepping up. So there are restaurants who are trying to help out a lot with food insecurity right now. The advantage of that is that when the crisis is over, the assumption is that the people who've been visible in the community through the crisis are probably the ones who are going to benefit and be remembered for that. So I think that if you can find that meaningful way to engage, continue to do that. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just want to just take a personal moment to say thank you to all of you who are here and being flexible and understanding as I also juggle parenting a 2-year-old daughter who sometimes is happy on these calls and sometimes is not. So if things are a little disjointed, that's a bit of the reason. Katie Lipsmeyer is from the Hampshire County or Hampshire Big Brothers Big Sisters, and she has a few things she'd like to add.
Thank you. Just so you know, I also have a 2-year-old, and that's why you can't see me. So if you hear some water sounds, then that is what is going on. Yeah, I really appreciate what you all are saying about contributing to the long term and finding strategies for the long goals. And we recently have been focusing on the short term, and we just put on our virtual daffodil run on Sunday, and it was an incredibly successful event. So I have 2 points about it. One is that it was really risky. putting on an event during this crisis, but we felt, Jesse Cooley and I felt that it was really important to continue it because we figured out how to. So if you need suggestions on how to do virtual events, then please reach out to me or to Jesse, and I can put my email address. But yeah, 67 participants, 260 of those signed up after we announced that we were going virtual. We had almost 300 submissions for photos of people who completed the race, and we raised over $50,000. And that is just a testament to how important our program is to the community, even though there are other organizations who are doing force behind this. And then as John was saying, people wanted something to rally around. And that's why people, I feel, were so excited to get on board with this. And so if you can find something that people can rally around and get behind, then I think that just strengthens the ask.
That's great. Kate, I have a follow-up question. Did you find the participants shift at all, anecdotal, meaning that the question is sort of anecdotal, but do you have any evidence that you actually had new people engage with you because this was a virtual event?
Can you repeat that question one more time? Do I have any evidence that what?
Yeah, sorry, I got a note that my internet was stable in the middle of that. Unstable, not stable. I was wondering if you had new participants as a result of it being a virtual event.
We absolutely did. We had people sign up all over the country, actually. We had 23 states, including Hawaii, and someone participated in Norway. And yeah, I think we definitely had some new people who signed up, whether they were family members or friends of past participants, board members, staff members. I mean, all of us really rallied around this and just did our best to publicize it as much as possible. And I know that some of you publicized it as well, so thank you for that.
It's great to hear that you all had the success that you did, because I think you're one of the few within this community that's been meeting that really decided to step out and in some ways take a risk and now have the data and the reward, but also the continued revenue stream and potential new audience to actually be able to build upon.
Exactly. Thank you so much for saying that, Kristen.
Dr. Higgins, I knew you were potentially wanting to introduce a thought and an idea as well. You're muted.
There we go. We're talking a lot about storytelling, and I'm wondering how many agencies are thinking about the need for telling this story and chronicling it during the experience as a way of preparing for any eventual similar event. So that is chronicling and creating like a crisis management operations manual. I didn't know if anybody had the thought about doing something like that and how this could be kind of an instructive process.
And I think what I'll add to that, there's an article, I think it's called The Hammer and the Dance, written by a public health expert who is essentially believing that while we had a very sort of abrupt, in some ways, depending upon what state and what community you live in, shutdown, but that there's potential for long-term reopening and closing based upon how the COVID-19 crisis continues, and how do we both sort of try to support the economic stabilities of our arenas when also trying to mitigate virus spread. And I think that sort of works in conjunction with what you're saying. And I'm curious if there are organizations who have been thinking in that way in terms of how does this inform the work that we do moving forward, as opposed to just the sort of contraction, fear-based organizing right now, and then sort of moving forward as if everything's okay and it never will happen again.
Kristen, I don't have a response to that particularly, but I would just add on the events topic that we've decided at the college to pivot to a virtual reunion this May. Reunion is a big draw for alums each year to the college, and we're looking at it as an opportunity. We know it's disappointing that people can't get together in person, but a virtual reunion, first of all, will have no cost to the alums. And there's going to be the potential of a much more inclusive gathering. I mean, we know that there's significant costs to flying or driving oneself to Northampton and staying somewhere and all that stuff. And that our audience is always limited then to people who are privileged enough to be able to take time off from work or spend the money, to come back to campus. And so having something virtual will allow potentially many, many more, potentially thousands of alums to gather in a different kind of way. And we will also have data. That's another thing that was mentioned, that when you do this sort of thing, you're able to collect new data and see how the community responds. So we're going to see if we have a chance to engage some people who haven't engaged with us as readily before, based on the crisis has given us this opportunity to try something new in a sense. And while we try to mitigate some disappointment for the in-person aspects, that there are ways to gather and celebrate when we're more remote.
I can add that as well, because we're looking at, so we've canceled all of our in-person events up until July at this point. And then we have another event scheduled for August that we haven't made the decision on just yet. And then we've got events in September and November as well. But for our spring event, we've decided to do a virtual campaign. So we were originally, this is going to sound crazy, but we were originally set to do a lip sync battle at Log Cabin this June. And it was going to be a live event with about 10 participants. And now we've decided we're, over the next few weeks, putting out a virtual campaign for anyone to submit a 1-minute lip sync video to compete and raise a little bit of funds for the food bank. And we too also feel like this is kind of a fun opportunity where these events usually are 21 and up. We can't bring, we can only have so many people perform, so many people can get involved. Engage families and different types of audiences that people are already making content on their phones for fun, and maybe this is a good way to spread joy, make a difference. And we also just felt like doing a virtual campaign now, the public might just be a little bit more patient as we're working through it and learning new things, because I've never done a virtual campaign before. The food bank has never done one to this extent before. So we felt like this was a good opportunity to try something new. And, it does lower our costs quite a bit by not having an event and paying for food. So I do think that this crisis, isn't interesting, with more people being online and more eyeballs on your social media and across different channels. It is kind of an interesting way to engage with new audiences that maybe wouldn't have normally been able to pay for a ticket to go to an event, or, to be more involved with it. So it's definitely an interesting, it's a new world.
Kristen, I think I might be able to get to the original question a little bit in terms of planning for the future. And I do think it's important for all organizations to not only talk about what the COVID-19 response is, but what their long-term plans and response are. And the reason for that is that different donors are looking for different things. So we're getting a lot of donors calling us saying, I want to help out. Would you please guide us as to what's the best way to help out? And the truth of the matter is, a lot of it really depends on what their slant is. What is it? How are they inclined to help? And some people are very much, I want to respond now. I want to give in an emergency way. Tell me what I can do. And others are more long-term planners, and they want to help in that way. And they want to say, you know what, I know that this is going to be a crisis that's ongoing, and I want you to get back to me, or I want you to give me some advice as to how to give in a way that has to do with more long-term planning. So by giving both of those options, I think you're appealing to a wider set of donors and different predilections.
Let me also add that in response to the question around a playbook for future considerations or future crises that may come up, at the Chamber of Commerce, we have certainly learned a lot about ourselves through this crisis. And one of the things that we've learned is that we probably shouldn't be so skittish about asking our members to support us because we're so used to supporting them. But what we have found and what we've learned is that our members are dedicated to their investment in the community, and they're dedicated to their membership in the chamber. For example, we believe it was the right first 4 weeks of the crisis. But then we realized at some point we were going to have to re-engage on that front. And we did so, and the response was just incredible. And we did it in a thoughtful way where we talked about our support and reminded people of our mission and our value proposition. And when they're investing in a membership, because they're not just donors for a cause, but they're investing in the community when they invest in the chamber through membership. They let us know that they appreciate the services that the chamber provides by being that source of information that's going out a couple of times a week. So what this crisis has done for us, and I think as we look to the future, is to help us to be more confident in our communication around the value proposition of the chamber. And while we have been accustomed to communicating that on a one-on-one basis, we haven't always done so consistently. And that's one of the things that came out in our strategic plan, was to let people know more about the great work that the chamber is doing. And so this, I think, situation that we're in has elevated the tangible benefits of the chamber's role in the community. So for that, we see a small light of enlightenment, if you will, that's come our way. And the other thing too is what we found is that as people look to help, they're looking for new ways to engage. And we've had things to come our way that were really seemingly small things, like people volunteering their time and services for things at the chamber that we used to pay for, like landscaping or cleaning services. So, and this is coming from our membership. So one of the things that we've learned is just to appreciate that it's okay to ask for help, and people will be willing to help because they see the services that you're providing. And most of you as nonprofits do provide what I call essential services to the community in ways that are just incredible. And I think as we look to the kinds of programs that we're going to be doing in the future, I think you will see us being a lot more bold and a lot more inclusive, as the strategic plan that we've laid out suggests we should be, in engaging the community. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Vince. I have a follow-up question for you. Do you feel that you would be as bold or as direct if you hadn't had just done a strategic plan that was adopted by your entire organization? Or do you think that that really was like a helpful element for you to, in a time of general instability, help guide you forward?
The strategic plan was a great direction setting document that got us on the right path to do that. The crisis itself has forced us to do it quicker and sooner and in a way that we didn't expect. and made us take some quantum leaps in areas that we probably would have just eased into. So I have to say that we were already heading down that path, but probably not in a fast track way.
That's
But that's a
very
great
helpful. Yeah. And I'm wondering if there are other people on this call who are finding their strategic plan to be a real sort of compass and guiding light right now within the work that each of you are doing. And also, are there organizations that are recognizing that strategic planning would be incredibly helpful and it isn't existent?
This is Ruth from the Northampton Jazz Festival. I do think that this is a time where it's very tempting to do things that are tactical because our world is changing every single day. Every time we look at a news report, there's some new piece of information, often of which has a real impact on our organizations. But we have to fight that urge to be tactically responsive and do the kind of careful thinking that Vince has talked about, that John Bidwell has talked about, which is to be strategic and to fight that urge to take action too quickly, but to be strategic, to think about what is the value of Giving Tuesday to my organization and how can I make it relevant to my donors. And for me, with the Jazz Festival supposedly happening October 2nd and 3rd, I definitely have to think about the future. That's my only focus, is trying to figure out where will we be, you know, in October, similar to what Maria is probably going through. So I think while our world is changing so quickly, this is a time where it's ever more important to force yourself to be strategic and to ask those questions before you take action.
Yeah, I can't endorse that enough with Ruth. It is so easy to get busy in our day-to-day functions that we miss the strategic piece. But we're in the middle of starting that strategic planning for next year. And one of the first things that we're trying to figure out is anytime you do strategic planning, you have to have some knowledge, you have to have some assumptions that go into it. And all the previous assumptions aren't necessarily applicable now. So the first order of business in the last week, and what we're doing right now, is figuring out what are our assumptions going forward for the next year, year and a half. And we've been talking to all kinds of experts, everyone from investors to banks to medical people, to try to say, what's our best bet for when things are going to come back to normal? Because we have to plan on something. If we're just reactionary, we might miss opportunities or whatever. So it does entail some information gathering. It entails putting a stake in the ground and making some assumptions and building off of those assumptions. But having a plan in place is really important, because you might just be tactical, and one tactic for one organization might be very successful, but it may not actually be the right tactic for you. One of the things that I think is good to note right now is we've actually had some business planners approach us and say, hey, look, you know, we're willing to offer services to organizations. And I say this to you because my guess is that there are planners out there that are very eager to work with organizations, may even do so at a lower rate than they normally would. And I would encourage you to engage with people like that, at least on some just very thoughtful establishment of what your goals are and what the assumptions are, and building off that.
I couldn't agree more with everything that has been said. The approach that we're taking in development at Smith is really to take our 5-year strategic plan that we already had prior to the pandemic and map it towards different case scenarios that we're mapping out based on the potential, you know, if we were to have to delay an incoming class and how that would impact the financials and all those things. So if we had to reduce our, you know, operating budget by 5%, 10%, 20%, whatever it is, and then looking at the strategic plan and saying, well, what were the sacred cows? What is nice to have, but maybe not important? What might we be able to push forward a year to come up with plans so that when the level of uncertainty is reduced and we are able to understand our direction, we have plans to go to versus having to scramble at that point. So it's a little bit of the current fiscal year ending June 30th, figuring out what we can in the short term complete in terms of operations, while really using this time right now to plan against those different scenarios and figure out what in our strategic plan really is core to it, and then what was growth that we were looking towards and what we may be able to delay and all of that.
Yeah, we're looking at 6 different scenarios going into next year for that exact reason. And the other reason is that it's going to help us decide what of the best scenarios are we going to pursue as we go into next year.
Mm-hmm.
Can I jump in? I just wanted to add into what we've been talking about with the strategic planning and thinking strategically, involving the volunteers that we already have in place as nonprofits. We have boards, we have committees, getting those people involved. I think sometimes people have a tendency, and organizations have a tendency to get caught up in crisis management. It's a crisis that we're all going through, but we're all going through it differently. How it affects our organization is unique to us. But then how we use our volunteers can also be unique to us, seeking them out, getting their opinions on things, getting them more involved than ever before. I think that in many cases, people have more time on their hands, and that becoming more involved is thinking strategically is a way to get them more committed to our organizations. And sometimes the best ideas come from outside of the box, that they see things differently than we do. And they might see a solution or a problem that we don't see, or they may just have an amazing idea that would not have occurred to us. So the strategy can be to just bring in what we already have closer to us, bring them more into the fold.
That's helpful. Thank you. Catherine, I see that you have your hand up. Can you unmute yourself?
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, you're unmuted now. I see you and hear you.
I'm from Northampton Neighbors, which is a fairly young organization. Haven't been in existence for too long, but we did create a strategic plan quite recently, toward the end of March, because that's when we were planning to do it, and we just went ahead with it. At the same time that we have had to suspend all volunteer services because our membership is a very vulnerable demographic. We provide services to older people in Northampton, giving them social support. And we've suspended everything except phone calls, which are happening on a very regular basis. We're also beginning to create some additions to our speaker series that will be virtual, in collaboration both with Cooley Dick and with the Senior Center, and we're hoping that will engage people. But I think that in the strategic plan, we really didn't even mention that we were suspending services, because we want to stick to our mission and to our long-term goals for growth and expanding services in whatever way we can, reaching out to the low-income seniors in the community. So although we had an immediate crisis-laden response to the virus, we really are keeping our long-term strategic goals. Uh-oh, there are the dogs. On the bigger mission-driven issues for us. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We have about 5 minutes left, so I just want to see if there's anybody else who has a question that they'd like to ask or anything that they'd like to add before we start to wrap up. One question that I have after just hearing some of the conversation is if anyone's experiencing positive expense control based on this sort of new way of working right now that's actually helpful in terms of maybe a different revenue stream and what that might mean, again, for moving into the future. So, when our view is changed, we see sort of essential and non-essential. And there were a few bits and pieces that were touched on, I think, with a number of you around those types of aspects. And I'm just curious if anybody's noticing the same thing. As an anecdotal sort of synonymous situation, I was reading a piece that California has experienced a $1 billion savings based upon the lack of number of motor vehicle accidents and challenges that typically happen every day. And obviously that's not something that will happen long term, but the number of lives that are saved, the lack of emergencies that are needing to be met has actually been supportive for the state based upon the situation. And while that's obviously like a grander scale than what any of us are managing, I am just curious if you're seeing these sort of glimmers of positive aspects as a result. I see John Scully has his hand up.
Yes, so hi everybody, I'm from the Hampshire Regional YMCA. And one of the aspects that we've really started to work towards is a virtual offering, which has kind of opened the door to a potential virtual membership. Our facility is only so large, so it's an opportunity for us to provide services where people are and when they're available. So we've really started to tune in on that and work towards that. It's also opened the opportunity for partnerships locally. So we've worked with the Senior Center to provide classes there, obviously with them not being operational, and neither are we, transitioning that to an online service model, in addition to working with Northampton Open Media to put classes on the public access channels. Again, people are thinking about health and wellness, so providing some of those lower level, entry level classes for free through a partnership with Northampton Open Media has really kind of opened some opportunities for us, some opportunities for partnership, and then a potential future revenue source from a membership side. Again, we're a little unique in the fact that we're a membership driven organization, but we're also a nonprofit providing financial assistance to the community. So it's a unique aspect for us to create virtual services, and this has forced us to really dive into that fully head on and work through those kinks so we can see what we may need in the future and how we can make it better for everyone in the community.
That's great. Thank you, John, for sharing. It's also really helpful when each of you share individually these little bits and pieces that you're doing. You're not just sharing this sort of personal experience that you're having, but you're also promoting the work that you're doing. And I think that's really helpful. And maybe along those lines, we have 2 minutes, 1 minute left. Does anybody have a virtual event coming up soon, or even something in the long term? And Ruth, you've been mentioning the Jazz Festival, and please feel free if anybody has anything that they would like the group to know. I see Karen Foster has her hand up.
Yeah, oh, wait. Hey, you can see me and everything.
Yeah.
I'm inspired to hear the success of the Big Brothers Big Sisters virtual event. That's really been great. Our largest annual fundraiser is typically in September, and we get about 80 to 100 people to kayak down the Connecticut River together. It's called the Kayakathon. And we're talking now about moving that to a virtual event where we encourage people to do something similar on their own, probably over a longer scope of time. So that's been really helpful to sort of hear that and hear that focus. And I think that's something that we'll be seeing come from AOA, by the end of summer.
That's great to hear.
And the chamber is planning for our annual meeting, which we postponed twice already. So we're going to make it happen, but it will most likely be an online event. So stay tuned. We hope to see you all there or engaged with us in some kind of way that's virtual. So we're excited about bringing you an annual meeting from the chamber.
Great. And I see Susan LaPointe has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Susan LaPointe from Riverside Industries in East Hampton. by now we would have had our largest annual fundraiser, our 16th auction that usually occurs the beginning of April to really kick off spring. So we obviously know that that date is past, and we have decided to go virtually with the auction starting on the 19th of June. We're getting amazing support from the community already with the announcement, and are going to be strategic about how we get through this. And we want to try to be even as innovative as possible, because it is an event where we get more than 400 people that come to one cottage every year and look forward to that. So I'm looking forward to being as innovative and active as possible with the online event. So
That's great. Thank you. Lucy Abbott, I see you have your hand up.
Oh, Naomi, why don't you go first?
Okay, I just want to say on this Friday at 3 o'clock, Northampton Neighbors is having a Zoom meeting with the head of CDA, well, Cooley Dickinson. She's going to talk for about half an hour about what Cooley Dickinson is going to do and what they've been facing, both for their staff and patients, and what you can do if you have the virus. And then there will be a question and answer series, and we're going to record it. So anybody, we can only have 100 registrants because of the limits of Zoom and our particular Zoom. So we will record it and people can see it. And I think it's a great opportunity that the speaker series of Northampton Neighbors is putting together for the local community.
That's awesome. And I just wanted to jump in and say, for all these opportunities that you
Lucy, you were having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. I don't know if anybody
else. Is this any better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. Just a reminder and an encouragement for all of these digital events and things that are going digital. I'm popping my email into the chat right now, and from the chamber, by the way. So send me those events as you're going digital and those announcements, because we'd love to include them in our community connector. Within the last 2 months or so, we've had to be nimble in the way that we use our communications to adapt to what our members are doing. And now it seems there are more and more digital events popping up. So be sure to fill us in on those. I took notes on the ones that were just mentioned, but let us know, what you have going on and what you have coming up so that we can be sharing that through our channels as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can hear my parrot has now joined us again.
And let me also ask one last thing of this group is if any of you have benefited from any of the CARES Act activity. We don't need to know specifics, but we would love to know your story or anything that you'd like to share, even if it's something as simple as, yes, we benefited, because having a sense for what's happening in our community helps us as we go forth and advocate for more support. So, and it's a way to also say thanks to our state and federal legislators who are engaged and involved in that work. So if you don't mind sending us an email or contacting Jess Thompson, just to say, whether or not your organization has benefited, that would be awesome.
That's great. Thank you, Vince. I'll share just a small story, but a touching one that does relate to that in a very personal way. We had a friend who used part of the economic stimulus check that she received to buy a really sweet toy for Kensington from A to Z that got delivered to us. So when you think about what that money was intended to, it's a few different things, not only to help people with their basic living expenses, but also to hopefully help small businesses within our communities. And it was a both really sweet thing for me as a single parent to receive a gift like that right now, but also knowing that A to Z was supported was really wonderful as well. So I know that's not exactly what you were asking about, but it still, I think, is an example of the way that people are really reaching out to try to support our local economy. I see Gary has a comment in the chat, and I was just trying to read it before. I think he was just mentioning that he's noticing a lot of people having challenges with the CARES benefits, and that's been the general story that I've been hearing as well. So, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're a few minutes over, and I just want to say thank you so much to those of you who have been a part of our panel. We really appreciate your perspective and the ways that you've been giving us some thoughts and ideas, and just thank you all for your time and all of the attention that you give, and again with your flexibility with me here in Kensington as well.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thanks everybody. Be well. We'll be in touch.